Radical reform or modest modernization? Assessing the first year in office of Pope Francis. Supporters say he has made being Catholic cool. But will the Pontiff's gentle revolution lead to real change in the Church? This is Inside Story. Well, Time magazine made him its Person of the Year in 2013, and his extraordinary popularity is credited with increasing church attendances around the world. But a year into the job, how is Pope Francis shaping up on the social issues affecting the Roman Catholic Church and the scandals? Hello, I'm Mike Hanna. Welcome to the program. He's been praised for his humility ahead of formality and mercy before moralizing, raising expectations that he can bring real change to a global church of 1.2 billion followers. But critics accuse him of mixed messages and ambiguity when it comes to the detail. From the Vatican, Barbara Sarah helped set up our discussion.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
A simple good evening and history was made. It was the first time the Catholic Church had chosen a leader from South America, but it was soon clear his nationality was not the only thing that would make Pope Francis stand out. His popularity was immediate because he practiced what he preached. Strong statements against inequality were matched by his choice to live in a modest guest house rather than the grand papal apartments. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he witnessed poverty and crime, and one of his first acts as Pope was to kiss the feet of inmates at a young offenders institution. His warmth draws massive crowds to his weekly audience, and his modest ways earned him the covers of Time magazine and Rolling Stone. From the rich and powerful to the less blessed, Pope Francis's appeal seems truly global.
Then you have a Pope to whom you can identify yourself with. He's in the better position to understand us, you know. When we talk to him, then he can easily connect with us, you know. So this is like he's with us.
Pope Francis inherited a church beset by the child abuse scandal and allegations of corruption. Over the past year, he's certainly been able to change the image of the church, but how much real change has he achieved behind the scenes here at the Vatican?
His critics would say not much. A UN report published in February accused the Church of failing to properly deal with cases of child abuse. The Vatican Bank is being audited, but no results have been released. And though the Pope's tone on issues like gay rights and divorce has softened, there's no sign of actual religious reform.
You cannot do this kind of things quickly without making disasters. Certainly he's a man who will do things, but in the due time.
A year on, there's little doubt that the Pope has the right intentions to change the Church for the better. But as these doves released by him and then promptly attacked by a seagull can attest, the best laid plans don't always work out as intended. Some see Pope Francis as a superhero, capable of turning the Church around after decades of mismanagement. And although he's had an undeniably great first year, he hasn't performed that miracle just yet. Barbara Sarah, Al Jazeera, the Vatican.
Well, to discuss this myriad of issues, let's bring in our guests. From Vatican City, Father Robert Gall, a Roman Catholic priest and associate professor of ethics at the Political University of the Holy Cross in Rome. In our London studios is Michael Walsh, papal historian and author of the book The Conclave, a sometimes secret and occasionally bloody history of papal elections. And also joining us from Vatican City is Massimo Franco, a columnist for one of Italy's oldest newspapers and whose work includes There Was Once a Vatican. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Father Robert Gall. How much of what the Pope has done is modernization, more about style, and how much is fundamental reform?
Well, that's an excellent question regarding fundamental reform or modernization. The conclave was looking for a man who would take over Vatican City, would take over the church really, leading it as Pope, who would reform the church around the world and also reform the functioning inside the Vatican. Pope Francis has taken some very daring and surprising moves in order to do just that. I think one of the most important things is really transforming the role of Secretary of State, which was once a kind of executive manager of Vatican City.
Well, Michael Walsh, let's put that to you. We heard daring changes happening there. Your view?
Oh yes, I think I agree with Father Gall. Bergoglio, when he was still a cardinal, made a speech at one of the congregations just before the papal election, in which he spoke about the reform of the Vatican. And it's said by Vatican watchers that that's one of the reasons why he was elected. And in a sense, he's now carrying out his program. Of course, it's a long process. It's not easy to do. Father Gall said the appointment or the change of nature of the Secretary of State, who is a sort of papal prime minister, is important. But I also think that for the church around the world, the changes he's been making to the Congregation for Bishops, the committee within the Vatican that appoints bishops around the world, he's been changing that, the composition of that, and that I think will make an enormous impact on the church.
We'll get into greater detail in a moment, but Massimo Franco, I'd like to ask you your initial impression. Has there been major change in the church in the past year?
Well, I would say there have been major changes in gesture, very symbolic ones, as the choice to live in Casa Santa Marta and not anymore in the papal flat. This was a major breach in the Vatican tradition. But I also think that the major shift was the conclave in itself, because I think it ended the season of a Eurocentric and Italian papacy. Now the fulcrum, the core of the Vatican power, has shifted towards Latin America. And what we see is the model of Latin America Catholicism conquering the Vatican. So this is the major shift. But what is quite clear is that this Pope is winning at the level of world public opinion. But he can actually win definitely only if he wins in Rome itself. On the contrary, his efforts might be frustrated.
Well, we'll get to those wider issues in a moment, but Father Gall, I want to return to what you mentioned there about the sweeping changes within the Curia, for example. He has taken a real broom, literally, to the Vatican, has he not?
Yes, he has. And as I mentioned, this transformation of the function of the Secretary of State is one exactly of no longer being like a prime minister or a CEO or an executive manager. It's really more like a secretary now who is serving the Pope who is governing more directly. And that's just as what Massimo said, that it's very important. It's not just symbolic. The fact that the Pope has moved into the guest house of Santa Marta, it allows him to control the channels and access in his own scheduling. The symbolic impression of this is how he takes out his cell phone and he calls people directly on the phone quite frequently. But it's also other gestures that may seem merely symbolic, but again are efficacious ones, that he's really a man of prayer, and he's a man of God, and he represents Jesus even. And this is part of the sweeping out of some of what Benedict called the filth inside the church, because there are people who have been seated in the Vatican who their careers are couched in a sinecure of having their position within the Vatican because of seniority. And Pope Francis has made it clear that we're here to evangelize, not to seek our own personal ambition.
Well, Michael Walsh, one of the interesting things and very solid things that were done was that he appointed a group of 8, the G8 as they referred to, of 8 cardinals to advise him on fundamental financial reforms, for example. And these did not come from heads of departments. They came from outside. He was seeking outside advice.
Yes, I mean, he chose cardinals from around the world to do that. I mean, I rather suspect that's possibly his Jesuit background. Jesuit superiors are bound to consult, and what does he do when he becomes a superior of the church? He consults. That's not quite the collegiality I think the church is looking for, but it's a step in the right direction. And he's chosen a rather a strange group of, well, not strange, I mean, a very mixed group of people to do this, who represent all the different sides of the church, I think, all the different tendencies within the church. And of course, he's also made one of those people, George Pell, the Archbishop from Australia, the Cardinal from Australia, put him in charge of the financial authority in the Holy See. So he's making some big changes like that. But I think what some of your other commentators are saying about the changes in the Vatican, the change of style, I mean, he's got rid of a lot of the bling which was associated with the Vatican, which was frankly embarrassing.
Well, Massimo Franco, you mentioned as well the impact that it's had on the church's following. I mean, one staggering statistic is that some 7 million people attended papal occasions over the past year. That's 3 times as many had done so in the year before. There's an absolute transformation in terms of the energy that has been seen in Vatican City, let alone the rest of the world, is there not?
Well, you know, we were watching for a long period a decline of the Catholic Church. If we remind the Church just 1 year ago, it was like a global culprit due to the pedophile scandals, due to WikiLeaks, due to the IOR maneuvers and dirty tricks. Now this is over. So this Pope achieved a great result, so that today he is again an authoritative actor at world level. This is a major change, and I think there was badly a need for a new Pope, a new style, more accessible to average people. That's what Francis is doing. Although I also think that, as I was saying, there is a big question mark about Rome. Yes, he's expressing energy throughout the church, but for instance, about financial transparency, we are seeing a mixed mood, because on one side of the coin, there is the need for transparency, and he's going forward on that. On the other side, there might be a collision with the need for preserving Vatican financial sovereignty. So there are critics who say that the Pope is going too far on transparency. This is a question mark that will be open in the last weeks and months.
Well, this ambiguity we will discuss in a moment, but first let's just step back a little and look where this Pope came from. He is the first non-Italian or non-European Pope literally in centuries. Here's a report from Daniel Schweimler in Buenos Aires.
A year ago, no one would have believed it. A South American Pope, an Argentine Pope, a Jesuit, never. If you think that the international media coverage of Pope Francis is pretty comprehensive, you should see how he's followed in Argentina.
Pope Francis may be in Rome, but the people of Argentina have not forgotten that he was their Father Bergoglio, and they're showing his hometown to the world.
The tour starts at this confession box in the San Jose Basilica in the Flores neighborhood where he grew up, where in 1953 the young Bergoglio decided to enter the priesthood. His childhood home, the schools he attended, and of course the churches where he preached are all included.
So far I think it's pretty special to get to see the places where Pope Francis took care of the city of Buenos Aires, and especially took care of the poor and the imprisoned, and so it's been special to get to see that.
Isabel met the Pope when he was still a young priest, travelling on the 109 bus.
The most beautiful thing that touched me was when he finished the Mass and waited for us all at the church door. He took our hands one by one. When he reached me, he asked me to pray for him.
Praise for his humble works, his efforts to reform, and his battle to resist becoming a pop icon. His progress is watched closely in his home city, which he's not due to visit until 2016.
Ha habido un impacto muy fuerte a nivel social en general.
We've seen a very strong impact, but the truth is that Pope Francis has helped to change the Church's image through his manner and his gestures, and that has captured many hearts.
Father Bergoglio may have left home, but his influence is having a profound effect in Argentina, boosting church attendance and inspiring interest in a Pope full of surprises. Daniel Schweimler, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Well, certainly the first non-European pope in centuries, but also, Father Robert Gall, it has been mentioned, the first ever Jesuit. Now, this is clearly something that is truly important. And just to make clear, the Jesuits are a particular order of the Church who are bound by humility, poverty, prayer, openness. They are very much the Catholic Church's foot soldiers. They are the doers. They are not just the talkers. How significant is it that the conclave actually decided to elect a Jesuit?
Well, I think one should consider that they didn't just elect a Jesuit in general, but they elected a very particular Jesuit and a very unusual Jesuit. While he is very much a Jesuit and he's very rooted in their specific spirituality and comes off constantly in his preaching as Pope, he's nonetheless not the typical Jesuit. It's interesting that generationally he bridges two epochs of those that were pre-Vatican II with those that are post-Vatican II. And Vatican II was, in the 1960s, an ecumenical council that did much to reform the Church. So that Bergoglio, Pope Francis, is very much rooted in a tradition of the Church, the millennial tradition, while at the same time looking forward to reform. And he brings to it this tremendous spiritual capability of looking inside himself to see what his motives are, purifying those motives and doing everything for God. And that's what he expects of all the leaders of the Church, to really be acting out of service and not of ambition. That, I think, is his policy of governance, and governance is service for the sake of the gospel.
What we also have, though, is a muscularity that was apparent when he was Archbishop in Argentina. His comments in 2001, when that country went through an economic meltdown, not to share one's wealth with the poor is to steal from them. This is a man who believes in liberation theology, is it not? Michael Walsh, this is something that he's bringing that was kept in the darkness for a while.
Well, that's an interesting comment, because he was renowned when he became provincial superior. I'm actually a former Jesuit, so I'm roughly a contemporary, or would have been a contemporary, because of course I was in England and he was in Argentina. But we obviously went through the formation at roughly the same time, and both impacted by the Second Vatican Council, just been mentioned, very much so. But when he was appointed as a very young Jesuit provincial in charge of Argentina, the Jesuits in Argentina, he was hostile to liberation theology. I think he has become very much more, he was said to be hostile to liberation theology, and in the 2005 conclave, where he was a possible candidate for the papacy when Benedict Cardinal Ratzinger was elected, he was a contender, as it were, and a lot of the Jesuits in Rome were very hostile to him because of his suppression of liberation theology in Argentina, or what was seen as that. He obviously, as time went on, he changed his mind. And clearly, in a sense, I think he's repented very much, and that's impacted his spirituality, repented of his stance in those early years as a Jesuit superior.
Well, Massimo Franco, you mentioned a lack of transparency in financial matters, for example, but there's also been a degree of confusion, if not confusion, certainly a degree of ambiguity in certain positions. Let's take, for example, the issue of abuse within the Church, something that you mentioned as something that has been a major issue for a long period of time. Now, the Pope has made very clear that he believes this is an internal matter. He has, for example, stated that he believes most abuse happens in the homes, and he insinuates that it is unfair to pick only on the Catholic Church. Is there an ambiguity here? Is there perhaps an unwillingness to embrace what has been a major issue in the public eye?
No, I think that ambiguity has started to finish with Benedict XVI, who understood very well that pedophilia was not a sin but a crime, and that Western public opinion overall wouldn't bear anymore the past approach of the Church. I only think that at the level of top Church, there is very clarity on that. But I'm not sure that the mentality all around the Church has changed as it has at the very top of the Church. Let me also add about the election of Bergoglio. I think that you cannot explain the election of Bergoglio without the resignation of Benedict XVI. That traumatic gesture provoked a traumatic election. So the fact that Bergoglio was elected, a Jesuit, an Argentine, and an outsider, a complete outsider of the Roman Curia, just is motivated by the fact that the end of a papacy with a resignation destroyed all the careers and positions of the past. Everything was possible from that point on.
Well, Michael Walsh, let's just stay with these criticisms of ambiguity and move, for example, women in the church. Pope Francis has stated very clearly, and his phrase is that women must be more present in the decision-making of the church, and yet he is shying away from debate about whether women should be admitted to the priesthood.
Well, he's not shying away from it. He said quite clearly that he doesn't think they can be. He said, "I'm a man of the church," and he thinks that his predecessor, but one, John Paul II, ruled out that possibility, rather in suggesting that it's infallible. I think I'd just like to make a comment about the question of abuse. I mean, he has been somewhat ambiguous about that, saying these things are not apparently facing them quite as straightforwardly as did Benedict XVI. But what he has made clear, which I think is actually rather important for his pontificate, he seems to think, and I think he's right in saying this, absolutely, that these are, if they're a crime, which indeed they are, as well as a sin, that these actions are sins, they're not just crimes, they're sins. The sins may be dealt with by the church, but as a crime they have to be dealt with locally, they have to be dealt with where they occur. And therefore the responsibility is not the Vatican's. The Vatican has brought this upon itself. It should have stayed out of it. The responsibility for handling these cases is the local bishop, the bishop of the diocese where the offence was committed. And I think that's the trajectory of the present Pope, and I think it's a trajectory of his, as we can so far see it, of his pontificate, that he is moving responsibility from the centre to the diocese.
Father Robert Gall, just staying with these apparent ambiguities, highlighting them, the issue of divorced Catholics being allowed to take communion, divorced wives, etc., etc. Now, this is an issue that he has opened up on. He has called for discussion on this in a very Jesuit way. Is there sincerity in actually, these are fundamental reforms that he's talking about here, not just the show, is it not?
Actually, if I can step back and mention something regarding what Michael Walsh has said regarding Bergoglio, Francis, and his background in theology of liberation, I think it has something that's relevant and that we can learn from with respect to also this controversy regarding divorce and remarriage and participation in the sacraments. I think there's really a great continuity in Bergoglio also with respect to theology of liberation. He was always in favor of the poor. He was always on the side of the poor, but he was never in favor of violence, nor is he in favor of a kind of Marxist analysis that would lead to a dialectical conflict between social groups. He was always interested in the individual person. And in a very similar way, with respect to this controversy regarding marriage, his teaching is always that which is revealed by Jesus, which is that marriage is a commitment that is unconditional and it's forever between a man and a woman. While at the same time, he's really interested in helping individual couples. And he acknowledges, he said so many times, that the church, the world today is like a field hospital after a battle has occurred. And he is there as the gentle shepherd, coming out to look after people, to cure their wounds, and try to help and bring them God's mercy. Now that, to focus everything on whether or not in a particular case they can receive communion, the Eucharist, Holy Communion, the Pope himself, it says, is to trivialize the matter. What we need to do is embrace these people and bring them back into the faith so that they can feel the salvation of Jesus, whether or not they've committed errors in the past.
Well, remembering as well one of the comments of Pope Francis on the issue of homosexuality, whom am I to judge? Well, with that, thank you so much to my guests for joining us, Father Robert Gall and Massimo Franco in Vatican City, and Michael Walsh in London. And do please add your voice to this debate on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.